chandeliers of the Newport Beach mansion threw broken light across a 5-tier cake, across champagne flutes frozen mid-toast, across the diamond burning quietly on Natalie Harper's left hand. Then Ryan Caldwell lifted the microphone, and his voice fell over the room like cold water. There's been a small change tonight. The woman I'm going to marry is Amber. Her own sister drifted out of the crowd in a gold silk dress, threaded her arm through his with the ease of a woman claiming what she had always intended to take. Phones rose. Laughter splintered in the air. Carol leaned in close, her whisper sharp as glass. Don't make a scene in front of everyone. Natalie didn't cry. She walked out into the dark garden alone, and somewhere beyond the laughter, beyond the cameras, a stranger in a worn flannel shirt was already waiting. 6 weeks before the chandelier shattered her life, Natalie Harper still believed she was going to be a wife. At 29, she was a mid-level accountant at a Newport Beach commercial real estate firm, the kind of woman who balanced spreadsheets and grief with the same quiet efficiency. 9 years earlier, her father had died of a heart condition the family hadn't been able to afford to treat in time. From the night of his funeral on, she had become the steady column holding her mother and younger sister upright, a check mailed home on the first of every month, college tuition covered, late phone calls answered without complaint. She did not consider herself complicated. She wanted to be honest. She wanted to be steady. She wanted more than anything to be seen for what she was actually worth. Her mother, Carol, widowed and frugal, measured love in practical terms. A good marriage, in Carol's vocabulary, was the door out of every worry that had ever kept her awake at night. Amber, 3 years younger and built for attention, had grown up in the long shadow of her older sister and refused on principle to admit it. To strangers, she was sunshine. At home, her eyes counted what belonged to Natalie. Ryan Caldwell had walked into Natalie's life through a quarterly audit. He was 34, the youngest chief executive in his family's commercial real estate group, with tailored suits and a Range Rover, and a way of speaking that made other men listen. He pursued her patiently. He proposed in a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor and told her, "I want to build a life with you if you'll let me." She had believed him because believing him was easier than the alternative. In the weeks before the engagement party, the easier story began to crack. Ryan grew harder to reach, blaming a development in San Diego. Amber, by contrast, was suddenly everywhere, insisting on coming along to dress fittings, posting cryptic captions like "a special night is coming," ending phone calls too quickly the moment Natalie walked into a room. One evening, Natalie caught the tail end of one of those calls. "You worry too much," Amber laughed when she pressed. "Relax, you're about to marry Rich." Natalie wanted to believe her, so she did. The night of the party, the Newport Beach mansion glowed like a postcard from a life she didn't quite recognize as hers. She wore an emerald gown, soft curls pinned at the nape of her neck, a careful smile she had practiced in the bathroom mirror twice. The chandeliers turned everyone gold. Champagne moved from tray to hand to lip in an unbroken current. Then Ryan tapped the microphone, and the room she had stepped into ceased to be hers. His voice did not rise. That was what would hurt the most later, the steadiness of it, as if he were closing out a quarterly report. "There's been a small change tonight. The woman I'm going to marry is Amber," he went on, every syllable measured. "Amber understands the life I lead. She understands what this position requires." The unspoken half hung in the air, sharp as wire. Natalie did not. Then Amber in gold silk drifted out of the crowd to take his arm. Phones rose like a flock of startled birds. Someone behind Natalie whispered, "Wait, the one in green? That's the bride's sister." A woman she had once called a friend covered her mouth, half shocked, half thrilled. Carol caught Natalie's elbow before her own legs had decided what they were doing, and her whisper landed cold against her ear. "Don't make a scene in front of everyone. Walk out the side." Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "What is he doing?" Walk out the side. Natalie walked. The garden stretched dark and salted with sea air, cut only by the low spill of light from the ballroom windows. Inside, the music had already resumed faster now, as if the room were anxious to forget what it had just witnessed. She stopped near the low stone wall at the edge of the lawn, both palms flat against the cold of it, and waited for tears that did not come. A man's footsteps approached over the grass unhurried. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not even look at her face long enough to make her feel watched. He held out a chilled bottle of water, the plain, kind condensation already beading along the plastic, and said, "Long night. Drink." He wore a worn flannel shirt and old jeans, the kind of clothes nobody at this party would have been caught dead in. His hair was dark, cut without ceremony. Close-up showed Carol's hand at her elbow. Strangers wrote essays about a woman they had never met. Natalie sat at her kitchen counter in yesterday's mascara, scrolling without really reading. Her phone rang. Her mother. She let it go to voicemail, then changed her mind on the third try. "You left early," Carol said before hello. People noticed. Natalie kept her voice flat. "Mom, your sister and Ryan want to come over this afternoon to talk. Get it over with all of us in one room like adults. The longer you wait, the worse it looks." There it was, the worse it looked. Not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "I'm sorry, sweetheart." The shape of how her mother thought had never been clearer than in those 5 words. "I'm not coming over." "Natalie, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being done." She hung up before her mother could find a softer voice to win her back with. In the bathroom mirror, the woman looking out at her was not the one who had pinned curls into place the night before. The eyes were swollen but dry. The mouth was set in a way Natalie did not yet have a name for. Underneath the pain, something colder and sharper had begun to take its place. A clean, deliberate kind of anger that did not shout, did not weep, did not beg an explanation from anyone. She could not control what Ryan had done. She could not control what would be said in every kitchen and every group chat in Newport Beach by the end of the week. She could not control whether her own mother loved her or merely managed her. What she could control was who she was going to be after this. She washed her face. She made coffee strong enough to taste in her teeth. She slid the diamond off her left hand, set it on the counter for one long look, and dropped it into a drawer she had no plans to open again. Somewhere on the other side of the city, a man in a worn flannel shirt was getting his 7-year-old son ready for school. He had no idea yet that the woman he had handed a bottle of water to in a stranger's garden would, before the year was out, be standing across from him in a county courthouse, in a dress bought off a Target rack, saying yes to a question he hadn't yet known how to ask. And Natalie sliding her drawer shut on a diamond, and a life that had cost her too much did not know yet either. She only knew that whatever came next, she was going to walk into it standing up. The phone call came on the 3rd day. Her supervisor's voice carried the particular discomfort of a man delivering news he had not chosen. "Natalie, come into my office for a minute." She already knew before she sat down. Ryan Caldwell had reached out to senior leadership, not directly, never, clears throat, directly, but through the kind of softened phrasing wealthy men used when they wanted something done. A concern about conflict of interest, a suggestion that her continued presence might complicate the firm's ongoing contracts with the Caldwell Group. "It's not a termination," her supervisor said, and would not meet her eyes. "It's an indefinite leave." She cleaned out her desk in 20 minutes. 2 co-workers found reasons to be elsewhere. A third, a woman she had once split a hotel room with at a finance conference, gave her a hug that already felt like an apology to a stranger. By the end of the week, the silence had spread. Group texts went quiet when she joined them. Friends she shared with Ryan and Amber stopped suggesting brunch. Her resume went out to 12 firms in the first 10 days. The replies were uniform in their politeness. "We'll be in touch. We're keeping your information on file. We're going in a different direction at this time." In a city where her professional reputation had taken 9 years to build, 3 sentences from a man at a microphone had taken it apart in a single evening. Then came the flowers. A delivery driver buzzed her apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. A vast spray of white roses and lilies wrapped in cream paper, the kind of arrangement that cost more than her last grocery bill. Tucked in among the stems was a cream envelope with her name written across it in a handwriting she had once thought she loved. The letter was short. Ryan's words were soft, the way a man speaks when he is trying very hard to sound reasonable, coming as a small token toward what's been a difficult situation. Sometimes life pushes us in different directions. I still care about your future, Natalie. I would hate to see a smart woman struggle when a fresh start in another city could put all of this behind you. Folded behind the letter was a check made out to her in the amount of $50,000. A second sheet of paper, more lawyerly than the first, suggested that her acceptance would be compared with a simple agreement, discretion regarding the personal matters between them, in exchange for which Ryan would be glad to make introductions in San Francisco or Seattle. She read it twice. She read it a third time because the first two had not been enough to convince her the words on the page were real. Then she tore the check straight down the middle. She tore it again and again until the pieces were small enough to drop back into the envelope. She slid the letter in on top of the shredded paper, sealed the envelope and wrote across the front in steady block letters, "Return to sender." She walked it down to the mailbox on the corner that same evening in jeans and an old cardigan, boy tugging at the other. He wore a different flannel green this time, equally worn, and the same kind of plain jeans, the same air of having walked there from somewhere real. "Daniel," she said. The name came back to her without effort. "You came to see someone that night." "I did." A small, dry smile. "This is my son, Mason." The boy was maybe 7 with serious dark eyes and a chipped front tooth. He looked at Natalie with the unedited frankness of children. "Are you sad?" Mason asked. "You look kind of sad." A laugh broke out of her before she could stop it, startled, almost shy. It was the first time she had laughed in nearly a month. Daniel slid into the seat across from her without being invited, set the second coffee on her side of the table and said, "We do Saturdays here, days." He did not ask about the engagement party. He did not ask why she was alone in a coffee shop with a folder of resumes on a Saturday morning. He talked about the weather, about Mason's reading project, about how the man behind the counter always cut the cinnamon rolls a little crooked. She found slowly that she could breathe. In the weeks that followed, the Saturdays stacked up on each other quietly. Daniel said he did consulting, small projects, freelance, nothing that needed an office. He had been raising Mason alone for the last 4 years since his wife had died in a car accident on Pacific Coast Highway. He drove an old blue Ford pickup that he parked at the edge of the lot and never bothered to lock. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, the words cost him something, never wasted, never decorative. Mason, on the other hand, talked to Natalie like she had always been there. He showed her his loose teeth. He asked for her phone number on the third Saturday so he could call her if anything important happened, and she gave it to him without thinking. The first call came on a Wednesday night just before 10. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was Daniel's, but stripped down, quieter than usual, edged with something she had never heard in him before. Mason's fever spiked. "Hogue emergency room. He's asking for you." She did not ask why. She did not ask whether she was the right person for him to be calling. She grabbed a sweater and her keys and was in a ride share within 4 minutes. At the hospital, she found them in a curtained bay near the back. Daniel sat on a low stool beside the bed, a paperback open on his knee, his thumb still holding his place. Mason was small under the white sheet. Hair damp, cheeks flushed to red. When he turned his head and saw her in the doorway, his hand lifted weakly off the blanket, and his voice was a thread. "You came. I knew you would." She did not stay because anyone asked her to. She stayed because the idea of leaving did not occur to her. Somewhere around 2 hours in the morning, the fever broke. Daniel finally let his shoulders drop against the wall behind him, eyes closed, the paperback face down across his thigh. Mason slept with one small hand, wrapped around 2 of Natalie's fingers. In the grey light of the parking lot the next morning, Daniel walked her to her car. He stopped before she opened the door, looked at her with something tired and unguarded in his face, and said, "Thank you. 4 years. That's the first time I haven't done one of those nights alone." She did not have a clean answer for him. She nodded, got in the car, and drove home with her hands shaking on the wheel, not from fear, but from the recognition of something she had not been looking for. 2 weeks later, the 12th rejection email arrived. She read it standing at her kitchen counter in the same spot where she had once dropped a diamond into a drawer. "We regret that we are unable to move forward at this time." The same gentle phrasing, the same closed door. She closed the laptop and opened her phone instead, and the algorithm, kind as a knife, served her a photograph of Amber at a bridal salon in Costa Mesa, half turned in front of a three-way mirror, smiling at the camera, in the very dress Natalie had once put a deposit down on and walked away from. She did not cry then. She got dressed. She drove to the coffee shop. She had not called Daniel. He arrived anyway 20 minutes after she sat down at the corner table by the window. She did not ask how he had known. He set a cup of black coffee in front of her, slid into the seat across from her, and said nothing. The tears came after the third sip. Quiet at first, and then less so. Daniel pushed a folded napkin across the table toward her hand. He did not reach for her. He did not tell her it would be all right. What he said, low enough that no one else in the small room could hear, was, "You don't have to be strong with me." She cried for 10 minutes. He sat through every one of them without flinching, without filling the silence with anything she would later have to forgive him for. When she could speak again, sidewalk. A bus hissed at the corner. Then Daniel said very quietly, "Marry me." Natalie almost laughed. She almost asked him if he had lost his mind. What stopped her was his face, the absence of any grin, any uncertainty, anything that looked like a joke being walked back. "I'm not saying it out of pity," he said. "I'm not saying it to prove anything to anyone. I'm saying it because in 3 months I haven't seen anyone who deserves to be treated better than you. And because Mason needs someone like you in his life. So do I." She studied him across the table. The same worn flannel, the same plain face, the same steadiness she had been leaning on without admitting it. Then she asked the only honest question she had left. "Who are you really, Daniel?" He held her gaze. "I'll tell you after you answer me." There was no manipulation in it, no flicker of pride. Only the same quiet that had handed her a bottle of water in a stranger's garden on the worst night of her life. She said yes. The Orange County courthouse 2 weeks later had the smell of old paper and floor wax. She wore a simple white dress she had bought off a clearance rack at a Target in Costa Mesa, and a pair of low heels she already owned. Daniel wore a navy button-down shirt without a tie. Mason stood between them in the only suit he owned, a small one from a cousin's christening, holding a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning from the park behind the apartments. Their witnesses were Daniel's elderly next-door neighbor, the courthouse clerk, and a woman from the records office who had clearly seen many such ceremonies and still smiled at this one. The whole thing took 12 minutes. When the officiant told Daniel he could kiss his bride, he did so once, lightly, like a man making a promise rather than a performance. On the courthouse steps, Mason looked up at her hair sticking up in the back where his father had missed a comb stroke and asked, "Are you my mom now?" Nobody had a clean answer for him. Nobody wanted to say no. The world that did not know her saw a different story. Natalie Harper, the woman who had been left at the microphone, had married some quiet single father with no name, no money, no following. A man with an old truck and a child and a flannel shirt. The internet, when it noticed it all, called it a downgrade. Carol called once and could not bring herself to congratulate her own daughter. Amber said nothing. 2 months into the marriage, Natalie took a position at a small logistics firm just inside the Irvine line. The owner was a tired, decent man whose finances had been a tangle for years. She rebuilt his accounting from the ground up, flagged a billing leak that had been bleeding the company for 8 quarters, redesigned the cash flow model, and saved the firm more in 6 weeks than her annual salary. Then the letter came. It arrived by certified courier on a Thursday. The letter belonged to one of the most expensive intellectual property firms in Southern California. The complaint, dressed up in careful language, claimed that Natalie was using a proprietary financial model developed during her employment at her previous firm, a firm under contract with the Caldwell Group. Response required within 10 days. Failure to respond would result in formal litigation against both her and her new employer. Her boss at the logistics firm went ashen when she set the letter on his desk. She read the complaint 3 times in her car before she drove home. The legal grounds were thin. Anyone who had actually built a financial model from scratch could see the differences in methodology, but thin was not the same as harmless. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, would gut a small company in attorney's fees within months. The owner would settle. He would have no choice, and the settlement would carry her name on it into every search result, into every future job interview. She brought the letter home and laid it on the kitchen table. Daniel read it once, slowly, the way he read everything. He did not look surprised. He did not look afraid. When he finished, he set the pages down and said, "This complaint is weak." "What do you know about intellectual property law?" The question came out sharper than she meant it. He looked up at her with an expression she could not entirely place. "Enough to know about this." He spent the next 2 days at the kitchen table with his laptop and a yellow legal pad, working with a focus that did not match anything she had ever seen him do for consulting on small projects. He pulled archived emails from her old firm, emails she didn't remember saving some of them from before she had ever heard of the Caldwell Group, and built a timeline so clean it read like a finished argument. He documented Ryan's pattern, the firing, the social isolation, the $50,000 check returned to sender, and now this, and arranged it the way a prosecutor arranges evidence. On the night before the deadline, he sealed the response in a plain manila envelope and wrote a single name on the front, the addressee at the law firm. He set the envelope by the door for the courier in the morning. "Trust me," he said. He kissed the top of her head and went. The night in the garden, Natalie was not sure which one of them she had bet her life on. The lawyer who opened the envelope on the morning of the 10th day was the most expensive litigator on the Caldwell Group payroll, and he had opened thousands of envelopes in his career. He read this one twice before he stood up. He read it a 3rd time on the elevator ride to Ryan Caldwell's office. The response itself was clean, a clinical dismantling of the complaint supported by a timeline of original work product so well archived that contesting it in court would cost a fortune and almost certainly lose. That was not what made the lawyer's hands cold. What made his hands cold was the signature block on the final page. Daniel Cole, Executive Chairman, Cole Capital Group. Ryan was on a call when his lawyer walked in without knocking. He read the signature line and then he read it again. And then he sat very still in his ergonomic chair while a sound left his throat that was almost a laugh. Cole Capital Group was not a name that needed introduction in any boardroom on the West Coast. The firm controlled a commercial real estate portfolio that stretched from Boston to San Diego office towers, logistics campuses, and mixed-use developments. Among the buildings on its books was the 17-story tower in Irvine that housed the entire Caldwell Group corporate operation on a lease that came up for renewal in 14 months. If Daniel Cole chose not to renew, Ryan would have 60 days to relocate every desk, every server, every employee to a new building in a market where Cole Capital owned roughly 1/3 of the comparable inventory. The board met that afternoon. The instruction to outside counsel went out before the close of business. The intellectual property complaint was withdrawn, not negotiated, not narrowed, withdrawn, and a written apology was attached on Caldwell letterhead signed by Ryan himself. Natalie's phone rang while she was at her desk at the logistics firm. It was the owner. His voice cracked with relief. They dropped it. The whole thing. They dropped it. He kept saying it 2 different ways, as if he didn't trust the silence on her end of the line. She thanked him quietly. She stood up. She walked out to her car in the parking lot, and only when she was sitting behind the wheel with the door closed did she dial the number she had memorized 2 months earlier without meaning to. Daniel picked up on the second ring. His voice was tired and even. "Come to the park," he said. "The one Mason likes. I'm here with him." She drove there in the kind of silence that has no music in it. He was sitting on the bench beneath the big coastal oak at the far end of the playground, the one Mason had claimed as his own months ago. Mason was a small, bright shape in the distance, climbing the rope ladder of the play structure, lost in his own world. Daniel had a paper coffee cup in one hand. He did not get up when Natalie crossed the grass toward him. He waited. She did not sit. "Tell me," she said. He did. The shape of it came out plainly with no decoration. He had inherited Coal Capital Group from his father at 28. The night his wife was killed by a drunk driver on Pacific Coast Highway, he stood in a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning and realized he could no longer remember the last real conversation they had had. Only the last calendar invitation, the last donor dinner, the last quarterly. He had tried after that to keep going. He had run the company for another 2 years, raising Mason between board meetings and press calls, telling himself the work would carry him through the grief. What he noticed eventually was that Mason had begun to look at him the way employees did, politely from a distance. 18 months ago, he had finally broken. He named a chairman of the board he trusted, kept his title and a controlling stake, and walked out of the office. For the 18 months that followed, he had been raising Mason in a rented apartment in a working neighborhood of Newport Beach, in old jeans and old trucks, in the company of people who had no idea who his family was. It had given him back something he had been losing for years. He had not planned to come out of it for anyone. When he finished, the silence between them held the sound of Mason laughing somewhere across the playground. Natalie did not melt. She did not weep. She walked away from the bench 3 steps forward and stopped with her back to him at the edge of the wood chip path. When she turned around again, her voice was level enough to cut glass. "You let me face Ryan for 10 days thinking I was about to lose everything I had just rebuilt." Daniel did not look away. "I did. You let me marry you without knowing who I was marrying." "I did. You let me introduce you to my mother as a man with nothing." "Yes." She studied him from where she stood. He did not defend himself. He did not produce reasons. The absence of any defense was in a strange way the only thing that stopped her from leaving. "Why?" she said finally. "Why not tell me at the start?" He set the coffee cup down on the bench beside him. When he answered her, he was not looking at the playground, or the ground. Of that at least had been a lie. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "I need time, Daniel. Not to leave. To forgive. Take it," he said. "However long. I'll be where I've been." Mason came running up before either of them could say anything else, pink-cheeked and breathless, wood chips in his sneakers. He looked from his father's face to Natalie's, and whatever he read, there was enough. "Did you tell her?" he asked his father with the gravity of a small judge. "Are we a real family now?" Natalie put her hand on top of his head, light, and her smile was tired, but it was real. "We're working on it, kiddo." "Okay," Mason said, satisfied, and ran off again. The Caldwell house in Newport Coast had glass walls and a view of the ocean. Ryan came home to it that evening in a silence so taut Amber felt it before she heard him. She was in the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, opening a bottle of wine for the dinner she had cooked because cooking gave her something to do in a house where she had begun to feel like a piece of furniture. He walked in without taking off his coat. He didn't look at her. "You didn't know who your sister was marrying," he said, and the way he said it made it clear it was not a question. Amber set the corkscrew down. "Neither did you." He turned then, and for the first time in their entire history together, she saw what was actually behind his face. There was no charm in it. There was no tailored softness. There was only the cold, thwarted contempt of a man who had bet on the wrong piece, on the wrong board. "You should have known," he said. "You're her sister." It came out flat and unhedged. And in those 6 words,